Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here from SEC Media Days, where Brian Kelly from LSU was the first coach to speak on Monday morning. And Blake, he set the bar high for himself. Like, you don't need standards if you're an LSU coach anyway, because the fans will set those for you. But just in case, he mentioned basically LSU having just won national titles in baseball and women's hoops, and he didn't out and out come out and say the goal. But let's just say that Brian Kelly, with his introduction, did not shy away from any expectations, spoken or unspoken.
He did not, and it was followed up by his players. I don't know. I know you were over with Jayden Daniels. I was with Mekhi Wingo, but he was asked the same question, kind of about what about all these championships at LSU right now, and that's what he said. He's like, look, that's kind of as the football program, that's our expectation. And Brian Kelly said the same thing. That's what we want to do. We've seen baseball. We've seen women's basketball. Like, now, here we go, right? Like, this is what our goal is. And again, they were further along last year than I think a lot of people expected. And I thought that was the main theme, honestly, Chris, as we were sitting there. I'm thinking the word that kept coming up was really just talking about, he sort of compared it to Alabama and Georgia, right? And what Brian Kelly said was sort of, we're excited what we've done in a short period of time, and that the foundation of success is built in consistency. That was his exact quote. And he just said, hey, Alabama and Georgia are the teams that are kind of doing that right now. They're playing for championships consistently, but we don't I love this line. It was, you don't do it by just being a one and done, right? Like, what they did last season was great, but guess what it means going into this season? It doesn't mean anything, because now you're starting over and you're trying to build off of that. So I think it's going to be very interesting just to see, again, what they are able to do this season. We're all very high on them. I think we all picked LSU to win the West, in our predictions we did in the summer. And so I think right now, when you look at it, yeah, I mean, it sounded like a pretty confident Brian Kelly up there on the podium. And I think that sort of confidence is kind of spilt over into his players, because I think we both kind of heard the same thing when we were with Jayden Daniels and Mekhi Wingo there. So,
Blake, no sooner had Brian Kelly started talking about expectations in a roundabout way, next thing he does is he starts in with his biggest concern, it seemed like in his words, that's a defensive backfield. And let me see if I can find, this isn't an exact quote, but I wrote it down pretty much as he said it. He said, when you have to dip into the portal and lose that many guys on defense, it's a concern. Then he said, you just don't know what you have here until you play Florida State, which probably not exactly the game you want to go into with your secondary being a concern. But I thought that was interesting. That was the first thing that Brian Kelly brought up on Monday in terms of things about his team that he was concerned about. And really, frankly, maybe the only thing he brought up that he seemed to be very concerned with.
Yeah, no, you pretty much nailed it. That was the first thing he was asked. And that was, like you said, right after his initial opening statement, he went right to that. And that, okay, well, maybe this is what we're chasing, but we're not quite there yet. And this is an area where it has to change. And I know he said specifically, you talked about the transfer portal comment. I think specifically, too, he's just talking about what he wants to see more than anything, it sounds like, is just getting off the field on third down. That was something that really frustrated him last season. You could hear it in his voice today when he was talking, and just, basically saying they didn't do a good job of that last season. And all kind of starts there for him, I think, on the defensive side. But, yeah, I mean, that was, again, if you're looking at one area, it seemed like there was a very clear focus on we need to get better there. That is a certain thing. And then I thought it was interesting to sort of hear his comments. I think right after that, he was talking about sort of on the opposite side of the ball, talking about the running game and what he wants to see from the running game. And he kind of talked about his philosophy on that in terms of, he doesn't want a finesse running game. Sometimes I don't think any coach does, but like, it's when you actually hear them say that, it's always something like he wants that physicality. He wants, basically he talked about physicality, the point of the attack. That's his big focus in their running game. And talking about, too, just kind of how that adds in Jayden Daniels, right? Because he's part of that, too, in terms of what he can do there. So I think all physicality and just how he wants to build his offense, it's going to be, kind of that physicality, especially when the ball is on the ground. But really just kind of seeing, again, what if you're looking at certain areas of focus, I think, certainly the secondary on defense. And interesting just to see, again, how that running game comes together this season, too, because he did speak a little bit on that.
Well, and a big part of their running game last year was Jayden Daniels, and he spoke a lot to Jayden Daniels and the adjustments he made. He said we had a learning curve with him. We knew him as a person, but not a football player. Said he had to make a 180 from what he was asked to do. And he pointed to natural progression in his game. He said in his last game, he was aggressive but more under control, ran when he needed, made throws into tight windows. That was a coach that, as I listened to him talk, sounded like not that he wasn't confident in Jayden Daniels going into last year, but it just sounded to me like, okay, now we have a guy at quarterback who's been in our system a year, knows what to do, and as he got more comfortable in it, he's going to be a better player based on what we saw him do from start to finish a year ago.
Yeah, the confidence I think was the key word he brought up, and that he's more confident now, and he just wants to see Jayden Daniels build off of that. And I think as you'll see you were over there for the Jayden Daniels portion of the interview section, which we'll upload here on the channel. We'll have that on here, but yeah, I think you sort of see that confidence continue to grow with him, and so yeah, that's a big part of it. And so yeah, this offense is going to be interesting. He also said that they were focused in the spring on really giving their receivers a chance to basically just get it and go, right? Like he really likes, I think, the speed that they have. And that was something else that I think he brought up. And yeah, I mean, there's I thought there was a lot with Brian Kelly, really, I'm looking down the list here. I'm like, man, there's a lot of stuff he brought up. We could spend a long time kind of talking about the different little nuggets that he brought up, but I was interested specifically just in the where their team is at, because some coaches don't really always give you, I think, a great idea of where the team is at this point. But he was talking about what he liked in the spring that he saw, and some of the biggest things, like we said, secondary, Jayden Daniels, and those kind of things. And so you have a pretty good feel, I think, of where LSU is right now.
Yeah, a couple other things that came up. Logan Diggs, the transfer running back from Notre Dame, said he's a big back, can play 3 downs. Asked about Daniels again and whether he was going to start. He basically said yes, but he's going to have to get better because Garrett Nussmeier's getting better too, which was interesting. LSU's got to have the deepest quarterback room in the league. Just some other things that stood out. He was asked about the schedule. They've got 3 or 4 games on the road at one point in the SEC. He said, we'll have to handle that, but the good thing is we got 5 of 6 at home at one point. Matt House came up. He said he just hated playing against him at Pitt and NC State when he was at Notre Dame, hated reading his defenses. They just never knew if they could get him out of his NFL contract or not, which, of course, they did. Asked about closing the gap on Georgia, said, I guess we'll know if we play him in a title game. And then a couple of off-field things, too, that were asked about the NIL, and I feel like all the coaches in the league are on the same page about this. It's a third-party involvement that makes it difficult for everybody. Said that keeps it unbalanced. He said, I'm not here to fix it. I'm here to negotiate it, which I guess is true, because what can coaches do to fix it right now? He mentioned different rules of engagement by different states. Maybe he had just listened to Greg Sankey speak, because that was exactly the same thing he had said. And I'm trying to think if anything else stands out here. Oh, he was asked about his accent. He said it has gotten better throughout the recruiting process. So I thought that was amusing as well.
There were 2 things in particular that stood out for me, and that was the accent, which he said, it changes depending on where he's at. And so he made it very clear, that he's liked where his accent is now. He thinks it's pretty good. But he also said, Chris, hot topic here, there's opportunity in using AI for game planning and recruiting. And I thought that was a very interesting question. I don't know who asked that, but I'm glad they did. I'd love to ask this question for Nick Saban about AI and all, like any guys, like anyone else in the SEC, asking about AI. And Brian Kelly said, hey, I think it's exciting. And he said it's something that we're about to venture into. And I think he was specifically talking about kind of building things out for like the ideal recruit and like, I think historical type stuff, like when you're talking about game planning and those kind of things. So, I mean, look, we all know that's a real big topic right now, and we may kind of dive into that ourselves here at some point. But I think for now, like I was pretty fascinated by that question. That was one of the better questions of the day, to be honest, in terms of the AI. So there you go. LSU AI coming to your city.
Sometimes I think Nick Saban is AI. Maybe we could ask him that. But it's funny, Eli Drinkwitz got asked the same question. And I was surprised. Brian Kelly had a very thoughtful answer on that. It sounded like that's something he'd spend a lot of time thinking about. Eli Drinkwitz, who came after him, or a couple coaches after him, just kind of said, I've got no thoughts on that. He brushed that aside really quickly. I thought that was very interesting.
By that.
I was too, but you have one coach here in the SEC that had a very well made answer, and the other coach that just kind of swatted the question away and seemed, I'm not going to say
it would have been the opposite. I would have thought it'd been the opposite. I had thought that
Me
Minkwitz
too.
would have been the one that really just got into it, but no. I go,
Yeah.
all right, well, okay. There
Yeah.
you have it. Brian Kelly,
Interesting.
leader in the forefront when it comes to AI. So
Right. Could be interesting to see how that plays out. Blake, any parting thoughts on LSU and Brian Kelly from today?
no, like we said earlier, we do have interviews up. Mekhi Wingo's already up. If you're watching this, we'll have Jayden Daniels as well. We'll probably break the Jayden Daniels interview into a couple different videos, so you can check out all the comments we had. Chris was over there with him for probably 25 minutes. So a lot of good nuggets from Jayden Daniels. So we'll have those up for LSU fans, and yeah, hit that subscribe button. A lot more coverage this week coming from SEC Media Day, and so we'll both be there. Unfortunately, one of us had to get away for internet, so one of us can at least have some internet to upload all this stuff. So it happened to be me, but yeah, we'll have it covered.
Yeah, internet and upload speeds have not been the greatest here from the venue. But anyway, all right, we'll have thoughts on every coach who speaks. We're going to see all 14 of them. We'll have some snippets of your favorite player interviews. We'll have those coming up later this week. Best way to get that, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button too. Tell a friend. That helps us get noticed. For Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee. We're Southeastern 14. We'll see you back soon with more content from SEC Media Days.